mention my motherfucking name, I disrespect you, make you throw your motherfucking life away. Chump. You a chump. You and your clique are mob tied. Y'all can fuck my. Let me tell you something, homie. I didn't have no show. I was working with the same organization that works against you. James Prince got a house full of them. Because the FBI want the Houston Police Department and James Prince too. Why you think Houston police keep turning the other way on all these? How do you think James Prince can get a police report to an open murder investigation that includes his son? And none of the stuff is redacted. None of the information on this none of this names is blotted. How can James Prince get access to that? He working with the police, I'm working with the government. Come on out here. Bring your ass on out here. We ready for war with anybody to go, anybody. I ain't just talking. You scared of James Prince. James Prince, for his daughter, his kids, his organization. If you a mob, I'm a nation, nigga. Run up on me, James Prince. I'm mob. I'm gonna go to war with the goddamn police for wild shit I got in here. What's wrong with you? You can go to war with police. What's wrong with you? I don't give a nothing. Prince, mob ties, and sister, nigga. Come go to war with ready for war.
Charleston White is back at it again. This time, he's aiming straight at J. Prince Jr. and the whole mob ties image. He's going after Houston's so-called check-in culture. That idea that celebrities need to bow down for safety whenever they come through the city. Charleston makes it crystal clear he's not checking in with anybody, no matter how big their name is supposed to be. He's questioning just how secure things really are in Houston if stars are being told to check in, but trouble still happens. With Takeoff's passing still fresh in people's memories, Charleston flips the narrative and calls out J. Prince Jr. directly, saying, "The streets are speaking and everybody's watching." He doesn't hold back. He paints mob ties as nothing more than intimidation, and even laughs at the idea of anyone needing their protection just to move around safely. Charleston breaks it down even further. He calls out what he sees as hypocrisy. If mob ties really runs Houston, and their word carries so much weight, then why do major incidents keep happening under their watch? He mocks the whole setup, saying it's more of a show than real security. He points out that plenty of rappers and entertainers still end up caught in messy situations despite this so-called protection system. In his words, checking in isn't real respect, it's just intimidation dressed up with a nice label. Charleston doubles down, making it clear he's not afraid of the Princes or anyone linked to mob ties. His whole point is simple. Real power doesn't come from forcing people to acknowledge you, it comes from genuine respect. And in his eyes, the Princes lost that the moment people started questioning what their name really stands for. He even compares the mob ties reputation to smoke and mirrors. Nothing solid, just a brand that looks bigger than it really is. And of course, Charleston being Charleston, he doesn't stop there. He tells the world flat out that celebrities shouldn't feel scared to come to Houston without checking in. He claims the tough image that J. Prince Jr. and his people try to push is falling apart because true protection doesn't look like what happened to Takeoff. Charleston doesn't just poke at mob ties, he breaks down the illusion piece by piece. He says if their influence was really as strong as people claim, then Houston wouldn't have so many high-profile tragedies. He calls it a myth that's been sold to rappers and entertainers, a way to make people believe they need permission just to exist in the city. According to Charleston, the whole idea falls apart the moment you look at the facts. Stars still get caught in dangerous situations even after so-called checking in. He laughs at the contradiction, saying real safety doesn't come from a name. It comes from a community that actually protects its people. He pushes even harder, saying that mob ties operates more like a brand than a true movement. Charleston compares it to a flashy logo, loud, recognizable, but empty when it comes to actual substance. He says the younger generation isn't buying into it anymore because they see how social media exposes everything instantly. In his words, a name alone can't hide the truth when every mistake and every tragedy is caught on camera and goes viral in seconds. The streets aren't run by whispers anymore. They're run by receipts, and Charleston claims mob ties can't control those receipts. Charleston even challenges the entire culture of intimidation. He says too many rappers confuse fear with loyalty, and that's why they end up trapped in situations they can't escape. He argues that if an artist is only showing respect because they're scared of what might happen if they don't, then that's not respect at all, it's submission. He calls this the biggest lie of Houston's check-in system because it turns strong entertainers into nervous targets instead of empowering them to stand tall on their own. According to him, Mob Ties hasn't built a shield. It's built a shadow that follows people wherever they go. Then Charleston flips the script on the fans themselves. He says the cycle of fear only exists because the public gives it power. Every time someone brags about checking in, every time an artist posts about being under Mob Ties protection, it reinforces the image. Charleston warns that fans are unintentionally keeping the myth alive by celebrating intimidation instead of challenging it. He asks a brutal question. If checking in really meant safety, why do the tragedies keep piling up? It's a question that leaves the culture with no easy answer, and that's exactly how Charleston wants it. Charleston doesn't back off. In fact, he goes deeper. He warns that any empire built on fear instead of respect is doomed to collapse. He says fear has an expiration date, and once people stop believing in the illusion, the whole system cracks. He compares Mob Ties to smoke and mirrors, insisting the image is already fading. In his words, the day people realize they don't need permission to move freely in Houston is the day Mob Ties loses its grip completely. For Charleston, that day is already here, and he's determined to speed it up. Charleston also paints Mob Ties as less of a brotherhood and more of a business. He says it's not about protecting people. It's about controlling them. He compares it to a membership club where the entry fee isn't money, but loyalty and silence. According to him, that silence is what allows dangerous situations to happen in the first place, because nobody wants to speak up against the very system they're supposed to trust. Charleston mocks the idea that loyalty should mean keeping quiet, even when the truth could save lives. He argues that real loyalty is protecting your people, not profiting off their fear. When it comes to threats, Charleston shrugs them off like they're background noise. He says every warning or attempt to intimidate him just proves his point, that the so-called respect Mob Ties demands is nothing but fear wrapped in a shiny label. He even brags that he sleeps peacefully at night because he'd rather stand on truth than hide behind fake loyalty. He claims his words are more powerful than any threat because once the truth is spoken out loud, it can't be erased. Charleston makes it clear he'd rather be hated for exposing the game than loved for playing along with it. Charleston also highlights how dangerous the check-in narrative is for younger artists. He says newcomers to the game feel pressured to play along, thinking it's the only way to survive in Houston. But in reality, that fear creates a cycle where they never feel safe, even when they follow the rules. Charleston warns that the new generation of rappers is waking up to the scam. And once they reject the system, Mob Ties will have no grip left. He says the culture is shifting, and Houston streets won't be controlled by one name forever. He then calls out the contradictions in Mob Ties, so-called protection. If the system is supposed to prevent problems, Charleston asks why it hasn't worked in the biggest moments that matter most. He says the fact that tragedies still happen under Mob Ties' watch proves the whole setup is more about image than results. Charleston argues that a true protector doesn't need to be advertised, doesn't need artists to check in, and doesn't need to demand loyalty. Real protection is invisible because it comes from love, not fear. And in his eyes, Mob Ties never understood that. Charleston ends his tirade by saying the entire idea of Mob Ties belongs in the past. He calls it a relic of another era, where intimidation could silence voices and fear could control the streets. But today, Charleston insists the culture is too loud, too connected, and too smart to fall for it. He says the image of power is already cracking, and every voice that speaks out only makes the cracks wider. Whether people agree with him or not, Charleston's message cuts through loud and clear. Real respect doesn't need to be demanded. It earns itself. And according to him, that's something Mob Ties can't fake anymore. Charleston doesn't just question Mob Ties, he questions the very foundation of street politics in Houston. He says the idea that one family or one name can control an entire city is outdated. According to him, Houston belongs to the people, not a brand. He claims that the so-called gatekeepers are holding on to a power that doesn't truly exist anymore because real power comes from influence, respect, and unity, not intimidation. Charleston makes it clear he believes the streets are tired of being told who they owe respect to. He even compares Mob Ties to an old record label that's lost its shine. Once upon a time, it had weight, but now Charleston says it's living off nostalgia and reputation. He argues that if you take away the stories and the myth, there's nothing left that really protects anyone. He calls it a brand trying to live off history and warns that new generations won't buy into a legacy that doesn't match the reality. In his view, mob ties is more of a marketing slogan than an actual safety net. Charleston digs deeper by pointing out how entertainers outside of Houston see the situation. He says many artists already talk privately about how unnecessary the check-in system feels, but they don't dare say it out loud. He mocks that silence, saying it proves the fear is real, but it also proves the respect isn't. If people respected mob ties, they wouldn't need to stay quiet. They'd be proud to speak on it. For Charleston, that gap between public silence and private frustration is proof that the whole image is built on shaky ground. He also calls attention to how dangerous fear-based systems can be for business. Charleston argues that labels, managers, and promoters shouldn't have to worry about their artists' safety just because they're performing in Houston. He says the idea that an entertainer has to check in before doing their job is bad for the industry and makes Houston look worse than it really is. Charleston insists the city deserves better, that Houston's culture should be celebrated for its music and history, not feared because of a brand demanding loyalty. Charleston doesn't let J. Prince Jr. off the hook personally either. He questions how someone can claim to offer protection when the most high-profile tragedy in recent memory, Takeoff's passing, happened right there under his watch. Charleston says that moment shattered the illusion more than anything else because it showed the limits of what mob ties can really control. He argues that once the streets see that kind of weakness, the reputation loses its power, and in Charleston's eyes, no speech or statement can fix that crack in the image. At one point, Charleston even flips the conversation toward morality. He asks, what does it really say about a culture when artists feel they have to pay respect through fear instead of being welcomed with open arms? He says Houston should be known for hospitality, not intimidation. In his view, real leadership means creating a safe space for everyone, not just your own circle. He accuses mob ties of turning Houston's name into something that outsiders associate with fear instead of pride, and he makes it clear that's a legacy that can't last. Charleston also fires back at those who accuse him of stirring trouble. He says he's not creating problems, he's exposing them. In his eyes, mob ties only thrives in silence, and the more people stay quiet, the longer the myth survives. By speaking out, Charleston claims he's giving power back to artists and fans who feel trapped by the system. He even dares mob ties to respond, saying that the louder they push back, the more they prove his point that their power is built on fear, not respect. And finally, Charleston widens the conversation beyond Houston. He says the check-in mentality isn't just about one city, it's a problem across the culture. Anytime intimidation is disguised as respect, it holds the industry back. He argues that artists should be free to travel anywhere without fearing who they might upset. He insists that mob ties is just the loudest example of a bigger issue, respect being forced instead of earned. Charleston warns that unless the culture challenges this mindset, tragedies will keep happening, and the people demanding loyalty will keep hiding behind their reputations instead of real protection. Charleston says the biggest problem with mob ties is that it tricks young artists into believing fear equals safety. He argues that once a new rapper enters Houston, they're told that checking in will guarantee protection. But when Charleston looks at the track record, he says it tells a different story. Plenty of tragedies, plenty of chaos, and no real safety net. He calls it a sales pitch that doesn't deliver, and warns that younger artists are paying the price for a false sense of security. He also drags the conversation into the spotlight of social media. Charleston points out that mob ties built its reputation in an era where word of mouth carried weight, but today, everything lives online. He says the streets are no longer the only judge. Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter spread every story, every slip-up, every crack in the image. Charleston claims that once the internet starts doubting you, the streets follow soon after. In his words, mob ties can't keep up with the algorithm. Charleston even connects it back to business opportunities lost. He argues that Houston could be a top-tier destination for concerts, festivals, and celebrity events. But the shadow of mob ties scares promoters away. He says the culture of fear keeps millions of dollars from flowing into the city because outsiders don't want to deal with intimidation. Charleston insists that if mob ties really cared about Houston, they'd build safety and trust, not fear and pressure. In his eyes, their reputation is costing Houston more than it's protecting it. Then he goes personal. Charleston says he refuses to live in fear, no matter how many names get thrown at him. He claims that the moment you bow down to intimidation, you've already lost your freedom. Charleston makes it clear that he'd rather speak his truth and face backlash than stay silent and play along. For him, exposing mob ties isn't about clout, it's about principle. He believes fear-based systems die the moment someone refuses to participate in them. Charleston also compares mob ties to politics, saying it's all about image management. He says, just like politicians spin stories to look powerful, mob ties spins their reputation to seem untouchable. But once scandals and contradictions pile up, the mask slips off. Charleston claims that Takeoff's passing was the moment that mask cracked wide open because it showed the limits of intimidation. He insists that you can't sell protection when the most high-profile case under your watch proves you couldn't provide it. He even points out how dangerous the silence around mob ties can be. Charleston says too many people stay quiet out of fear, which allows the system to keep operating unchecked. He calls it the silence tax, the price you pay when you let intimidation stop you from speaking. But he warns that silence is breaking now. Social media has given people a voice, and Charleston says once the floodgates open, mob ties won't be able to control the narrative anymore. Charleston also challenges the idea that fear equals power. He says fear fades the moment people realize it's exaggerated. He compares it to a shadow on the wall, big and scary until you turn the lights on and see how small it really is. Charleston argues that mob ties built a shadow so convincing that people forgot to check if it was real. Now that people are questioning it, he says the shadow looks smaller every day. At this point, Charleston expands his attack to the larger rap game. He says the culture has been too comfortable with intimidation for too long, and mob ties is just one example. He argues that until artists, fans, and leaders demand respect that's earned, not forced, the industry will keep running in circles. Charleston says he's not afraid to be the loud one in the room if it means breaking that cycle. In his words, if nobody else will say it, I will. Charleston also throws in a warning. Reputations built on intimidation often end in downfall. He compares mob ties to past figures and movements that seemed unstoppable until the truth caught up with them. He says history always repeats itself, and the louder the myth, the harder the fall. Charleston insists mob ties is walking that same path, and the cracks in the image are already showing for anyone willing to look closely. Finally, Charleston makes one of his boldest claims. He says Houston doesn't need mob ties at all. The city, in his view, is strong enough, creative enough, and respected enough to stand on its own without a forced protection system. He believes the artists, fans, and culture of Houston are bigger than one name or one brand. Charleston says once people stop believing in the myth, Houston will shine for what it really is, a hub of talent and power that doesn't need intimidation to stay on top. Charleston hits them where it stings the most, saying all the respect mob ties demands is worthless if their name keeps being tied to drama and chaos. Fans online are completely split. Some are cheering Charleston on, saying he's the only one bold enough to say out loud what everyone else has been whispering. Others warn that he's poking the wrong bear and taking it too far. But Charleston doesn't backpedal one bit. He makes it crystal clear. He's not bending, he's not apologizing, and he's not scared of the backlash. In his words, mob ties ain't saving nobody. And if that's true, then maybe this whole check-in culture deserves to die out for good. Love him or hate him, Charleston White knows how to stir up conversation and keep his name ringing loud in the culture. By going after J. Prince Jr. directly, he's exposing cracks in the image mob ties has built for years. And whether you see him as reckless or as the voice of truth, one thing is undeniable. He's forcing the rap world to face some uncomfortable questions about power, respect, and what it really means to feel safe in Houston. So if you're rocking with this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment below. Let's get into it.